It's very important, I think, and I want to begin by saying what becoming a republic is. And many of you might know this, but I just want to repeat it here so we are clear. Now, a republic is a state in which, and I'm going to read for you the definition because I think it's important. A state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch. A state in which, that's where we're trying to move to. We're trying to move from being a constitutional monarchy to a republic, which would then mean that we have a state in which the supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. Right now, as it now stands, a non-Jamaican, a visitor to this country, King Charles, and before him, his mother, Queen Elizabeth, who passed away, they are the head of state. The Mountbattens, they are, Andrew Holness is not the head of state. The Governor General is not the head of state. He acts on behalf of the British monarch. That is the state of affairs. And we've been presiding over our own parliamentary type democracy since 1962. And we've not been able to remove the Queen. Throughout all her reign, she died, handed now down to her son, King Charles. And he remains Jamaica's head of state. I want us to think about that. What does that say about us as a people, that the head of state, the head of this country, is a visitor to the country? It is really an untenable state of affairs. And successive governments, and when I say government, administrations, both government and opposition, have failed to coalesce around this issue to remove the king as head of state and previously the Queen. Now it has hit another snag, and this push to get to where Jamaica is a state that the supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives is once again being threatened with derailment. Are we really serious as a people? Are we really serious as a people? That is the question I want to ask. And I'm going to get to my comments on this. But let me just play a few of the clips that have been in the newscast since of late. Yeah. So let's just get to a couple of the clips. Now, the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Marley Malahoo Fort, says support for the retention of the UK-based Privy Council as the country's final appellate court appears to have grown in recent weeks, is what she's saying. And I'm going to come back to this later. Yeah. Because I think there are two evils here. One hath committed the greater sin and the other has committed a lesser sin. And I'm going to get into that. I believe the greater sin here is being committed by the People's National Party. And then there's a lesser sin that is being committed by the Jamaica Labour Party that I want to address. So let me just frame that for you. So if you're going to get upset, let me just give you a cue from now. So perhaps it's those who support the People's National Party who are going to be most upset with my comments this morning. So I'm preparing you so you can be outraged in advance. Yeah, the greater sin here, I believe, is being committed by the People's National Party. And then I'm going to have to address that lesser sin, I believe, the Jamaica Labour Party is committing. But the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, that's Marley Malahoo Fort, says that support appears to have grown for the Privy Council following the ruling in the murder conviction of Vybz Kartel et al., Vybz Kartel and his co-accused. Let's hear what she had to say.
The government has said that as part of the move to make Jamaica a republic, we will have to decide on a final court. At one stage, there were three options before us: acceding to the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice, bearing in mind that we already have the original jurisdiction. The Caribbean Court of Justice is part of our court structure because we're a member of the Caribbean community. Believe it or not, there are many Jamaicans who are saying retain the Privy Council in spite of all of the challenges. And I think after the cartel case, when I've read the comments online, I see so many still discussing the matter.
All right. So that is Marley Malahou Fort. She was speaking yesterday at the post-cabinet media briefing. Now, Minister Malahou Fort says that she suggested rather that people are still not settled in their minds about whether they want to replace the Privy Council with the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ.
And some have floated the idea of a local final court because they're saying that if you move from London, you don't want to move to Port of Spain. And if we're talking about real decolonization, it means that you're bringing it to Jamaica. And even as I looked through the comments after the leader of the opposition's press release, I saw that point being raised again and again. It's just an indication that the views are many and varied on this matter, and we will have to work to arriving at consensus on it.
That is Marley Malahou Fort. She's the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Now, Government Senator Shireen Goling Campbell is accusing opposition leader Mark Goling of harming the country's constitutional reform agenda. She was reacting to Mr. Goling's stance on some of the proposals recommended in the draft report of the Constitutional Reform Committee.
I don't know what to make of the suggestion. I have seen comments that he has made to proposals in the draft report, but I'm very cautious because I haven't seen the draft report. So he's referencing proposals, but we are having a discussion without having seen the document that he's referencing. And this is part of what I view as a chaotic situation that the PNP president has led us into. I'm very concerned about the way we are proceeding when we have a body that was settled and we start to discuss these issues. It seems to me that his comments on the proposals, which I haven't seen, ought to take place in the context of that body.
The Shireen Goling Campbell there. And if you didn't listen to this interview last evening with on Nationwide at 5 with Shireen Goling Campbell and Professor Trevor Monroe, I recommend it to you. Yeah, I recommend it to you. And I must say, I was entirely impressed by Shireen Goling Campbell's assessment of the situation. Yeah, I think she is she's a welcome addition to the upper house. Yes, very cerebral, I think, in her approach to analyzing the issues. And I'm not suggesting I always agree with her, but I really have respect for her approach to the matters that are being discussed, the national issues. So kudos to Senator Shireen Goling Campbell. She's the daughter of former Prime Minister Bruce Goling, whose comments I will also offer some remarks on as well today. But she, Mr. Goling, that is Mark Goling though, not Bruce Goling, says he's willing to remain with the British monarchy for the time being if the issue of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ, remains unsettled. He has also proposed that the membership of the Senate be increased to 42. The Senate is currently comprised of 21 members. 13 senators are appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, while the other 8 are appointed on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. Senator Goling Campbell says the opposition leader has taken the wrong approach to the process of constitutional reform.
The opposition leader has listed his concerns about proposals, but he hasn't listed the proposals. So I don't know whether his comments and his concerns are valid, relevant, or of any measure that we should be discussing them, because what he has done is take this out of the process that would have been able to have long and fulsome discussion about it with the benefit of technical officers who would be able to do the research into the legal and legislative matters and advise the committee as to what kind of proposals they should come up with. This is not how you do legislative reform. You don't do it at the bus stop. The citizens of the country have their say, certainly. And at the end of the process, they will have a decision to make. But this is a very irresponsible way of dealing with legislative reform.
the voice there, Shireen Golding Campbell, government senator. She was speaking on Wednesday, last evening's edition of Nationwide at 5. We're up on the first break. Yeah, we're talking about the snag that this constitutional reform process has apparently hit. Yeah, and I'm not even sure we can salvage it right now. There are those who believe the political silly season is on because we are not too far away from the constitutionally due date of the next general elections. Not too far from the next general elections in terms of when it's constitutionally due, I should say. So let's take the break. And when we come back, we're going to hear from Professor Trevor Monroe, insisting that a massive public engagement is needed to support this push towards constitutional reform. We take the break. We're talking constitutional reform and the impasse that it has really been brought to. Yeah. We heard from the Constitutional Affairs Minister, Marley Malahoo Fort, and we just heard from Government Senator Shireen Golding Campbell. Now, the former independent senator, Professor Trevor Monroe, he insisted last evening that a massive public engagement or education campaign is needed to support the constitutional reform agenda. Let's hear what he has.
Education is foundational and fundamental to any constitutional reform process. The leaders in consensus and in agreement, that obviously is required, but the foundation of that must be the public understanding, technical terms, understanding difficult issues, the choice between parliamentary, presidential system, all of that stuff which has not been done and which now needs to be done even during this time. There needs to be that public education. This needs to be simplified. It needs to be put on TikTok. It needs to be done in all the ways that people can begin to understand why the Constitution is important, why is it of some significance to their lives, so that they themselves become engaged while the leaders, of course, seek to talk together in whatever way is facilitated.
The voice there, Professor Trevor Monroe, a former independent senator. He was also speaking last evening on Nationwide at 5. The Constitutional Reform Committee held several town hall meetings across the country in a bid to educate Jamaicans about the process to move Jamaica from a constitutional monarchy to a republic. I'm going to now turn my attention to Mark Golding. I want to play that clip with Mark Golding. Now, the opposition leader, Mark Golding, contends that a referendum on the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, is, as he put it, unnecessary. It wasn't as strong as forget it, yeah, but unnecessary. He also argues that putting the matter to the people would politicize what is a matter of justice, he says.
Choice of the final court is really not suitable to be put to a referendum process. Not one country that was in the British Empire, as it then was, and moved away from the Privy Council to establishing another final court has done so by a process that involved a referendum. None. And those that have a constitution that requires a referendum and that have tried it have found that the entire process has become fraught with politics. The issues have become very messy and politicized, and it has been an unsatisfactory process that has not led to the result that was intended.
I wonder if the process is messy as we speak. I wonder if the process has been politicized. I wonder if the process, political lines have already been drawn on this issue of the CCJ. Yeah, I wonder. Now, the matter of Jamaica's final appellate court can be settled with a 2/3 majority vote in both houses of parliament. A prior attempt under the then PNP administration in April 2015 was shelved after it was clear no opposition support for the motion would be forthcoming. Despite the existing political impasse on the issue, Mr. Golding holds that a referendum is not the way.
The process of removing the Privy Council and installing the CCJ as our final court has to be done by Parliament. It has to go to Parliament. It can't be done by a referendum that bypasses Parliament. That would violate the Constitution that we have. So that's a simple answer to your question.
But won't a referendum at least settle the matter as to, in the eyes of the public and the political directorate, as to what is the direction the country would like to go? Not a poll done by some pollster in some newspaper.
Yeah. As I've said, matters to do with the justice system, the judiciary, are best kept out of the realm of politics. It's not good to infect decisions around the justice system by the political process.
You know, I find that very rich coming from a politician, you know. That may be me still. That's Mark Goling, leader of the opposition. He was speaking at the office of the opposition leader in St. Andrew on Tuesday. Now, former Prime Minister Bruce Goling says any constitutional reform effort is doomed to fail without the consensus of the opposition. And the majority of my comments this morning is going to focus on consensus. Speaking on Nationwide at 5 on Monday, that's early this week, Mr. Goling, that's Bruce Goling now, not the opposition leader Mark Goling, says his experience on the matter suggests the attempt will die if both political parties do not see eye to eye. I don't want to play the clip, the rap from Ricardo Brooks. We just want to take a couple clips from it. Now, the former prime minister says any further pursuit without the consensus of the opposition is doomed to fail. He says he's already informed the legal affairs minister Marley Malahoo Fort of his opinion on this. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, Marley Malahoo Fort, I met with her a week ago. I met with her before that, and she thought my thoughts. And I told her quite frankly, I said, look, if you cannot get agreement with the opposition, don't waste your time. There are more important things for you in your ministry for you to go and focus on.
That's Bruce Goling there offering advice, wise advice, I think, to the Constitutional Affairs Minister, because this process really can't go anywhere without consensus from the opposition. Yeah, as you heard, a 2/3 majority is needed in the Parliament to change the country's final appellate court from the UK-based Privy Council to whether the CCJ or a locally based final appellate court, because that is also an option as well. But the Prime Minister went on to say something, the former Prime Minister, that I want to get to. Yeah. Opposition leader Mark Goling set the matter of the country's final appellate court as a red line for the opposition's buy-in. It was Mark Goling who did that. He believes this cannot be divorced from Jamaica's attempt to break away from the British monarchy. He's calling for a full decolonization, as they put it. Now, the former Prime Minister Bruce Goling says his experience with similar reform measures in the past proves the need for broad-based agreement between the two major political parties.
There is no significant change that can be made to the Constitution without consensus between the government and the opposition. One of the things that we had agreed on, for example, was the Charter of Rights. And initially, the TNT had insisted that they were not prepared to make any change to the Constitution unless we agreed on accession to the CC. Eventually, Portia Simpson Miller and I met in the secluded area behind the Speaker's chair. And I said to Portia, I need to bring this bill, but I cannot bring the bill unless you are prepared to support it. And she squeezed the hand and she said, yes, I will. And that's how the Charter of Rights bill was brought to Parliament and passed the most significant aspect of the constitutional reform that we're talking about.
The voice there of former Prime Minister Bruce Goling offering comments on this impasse now that we've reached regarding this constitutional reform push, this new push, the latest push, because this is not the first time we've attempted to amend the Constitution. So now here are my comments. And like I signaled earlier, I may very well upset a number of you who support the People's National Party. And then perhaps I'm going to offend some of you who support the Jamaica Labour Party. So let's begin with the greater sin. And for those who are questioning my theology by saying all sin is sin, that is not true. When the good master was before Pilate, he said to him, he that had delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. So there are degrees to this thing. You can have a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD in sin, right? Even though all unrighteousness is sin. So that's the premise from which I'm coming from. There is a greater sin being committed here. And that greater sin falls squarely in the lap of the People's National Party, led by the opposition leader, Mark Goling, president of the People's National Party. Here's why I'm offering that comment. You cannot come to the table in an attempt to get consensus, with your gun drawn. And that is what Mark Golding did. He came to the table with the CCJ gun loaded and he put it on the table. You cannot achieve consensus like that on such a critical matter such as constitutional reform. You cannot come to the table with your gun drawn, and Mark Golding did that. He knows very well the historical context in terms of the support the Jamaica Labour Party has shown for the CCJ. Historically, it has not been there. So let us not bury our heads in the sand. And the process was doomed to fail when Mark Golding came to the table with that gun drawn. The process was doomed to fail. The opposition is being obstructionist. And let me repeat that, and I'm being clear on this because this is a critical national matter. The king cannot continue to be the country's head of state. It is untenable. It is a slap in the face of our forebears who fought for our freedom. We cannot continue to have a visitor to this country, someone who does not have a Jamaican ID, a Jamaican passport. We cannot continue to have a visitor to this country being the head of state. What does that say about us as a people and our identity as a people? Mark Golding came to the table with his gun drawn. Yes? And the opposition is being obstructionist on this latest attempt at constitutional reform. Perhaps they want the credit for moving Jamaica away from the monarchy into republic status. Perhaps they fear politically the bounce that the JLP might get from this effort, that they can claim that we move the country forward, yes, into out of being a constitutional democracy, constitutional monarchy, into a republic, yeah? We move the country from a constitutional monarchy to a republic. Perhaps they don't want the Jamaica Labour Party to claim that. But can we afford to play politics with such a crucial matter? And the answer to that is no. So the PNP needs to stop this obstructionist approach. You cannot come to the table. You can seek to deal with where you have consensus, agreement. I don't particularly find that anything is wrong with this phased approach. I don't particularly, in principle, find that anything is wrong with it. And the Constitutional and Legal Affairs Minister said it at the media conference, the post-cabinet media briefing yesterday. She says it is those who've been elected who get to decide how the approach that is taken. Governments are elected to govern, and I agree with her completely. The opposition can't get to dictate to the people that the majority of Jamaicans voted into government as to how to approach this issue of constitutional reform. Had Mark Golding and his People's National Party come to the table and say, we need a decision on CCJ, whether it be 6 months into the process, exactly phase 2 after the process, but we need a decision on the CCJ and we need a time frame on it and hold the government's hand to that, that would have been acceptable, I think. But to draw the line that you're not willing to remove the king as head of state because of the CCJ matter, I don't think is reasonable or rational. It is not reasonable or rational. We're talking about this impasse involving the country's latest effort to achieve constitutional reform on this whole business of removing the king as head of state, the British monarch, yeah? Removing that person as being Jamaica's head of state, the head of the country, yeah? And we've hit yet another snag because chiefly because the opposition is being obstructionist and they came to the table with their gun drawn on the CCJ matter. You cannot achieve constitutional reform and consensus like that. You can't manufacture consent and you cannot draw those kinds of hard red lines if you're attempting to get constitutional reform on this matter. So the PNP is being obstructionist, and I believe they have committed a major sin on this issue. However, I also believe the JLP is guilty of an infraction, a lesser sin, but a sin nonetheless. I'm going to play a clip for you, and a question was put to the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs at yesterday's post-cabinet media briefing. A question was asked by, I believe her name is Shoshana Small, a journalist from the Jamaica Gleaner, and it was pitched to the Minister of Constitutional and Legal Affairs. And listen what she had to say on that. Let's play that clip for me.
Good morning again, Minister. Shoshana Small from the Gleaner. Minister, I know you've been speaking about the final court, but I believe it was in May, or October rather, that you said that the government would state its position. We're now in May, 7 months later, and we haven't heard anything, any indication as to what the position may be.
I think, Shoshana, it is that many have bought into the narrative that the government has been unclear about it. The government has not been unclear about the matter. The government has said that as part of the move to make Jamaica a republic, we will have to decide on a final court. At one stage, there were three options before us: acceding to the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice, bearing in mind that we already have the original jurisdiction. The Caribbean Court of Justice is part of our court structure because we're a member of the Caribbean community. Believe it or not, there are many Jamaicans who are saying retain the Privy Council in spite of all of the challenges. And I think after the cartel case, when I've read the comments online, I see so many still discussing the matter. And some have floated the idea of a local final court because they're saying that if you move from London, you don't want to move to Port of Spain. And if we're talking about real decolonization, it means that you're bringing it to Jamaica. And even as I looked through the comments after the leader of the opposition's press release, I saw that point being raised again and again. It's just an indication that the views are many and varied on this matter, and we will have to work to arriving at consensus on it. The majority of the People's National Party may have gotten to that place, but we also know that members who identify with the People's National Party have expressed another view on the matter.
That there from the country's Legal and Constitutional Affairs Minister. Now, quite frankly, the minister did not answer the question. And that is the problem with the JLP on this matter. They are obfuscating on the CCJ issue. Yeah, they're not being clear. Yeah, and I'm not sure why. Governments are elected to govern. You are elected to lead. What is the government's position on the CCJ? And the reporter there pointed to comments offered by the Marley Malahoo Fort in, let me see, this is October 2023, and I'm looking at a report by Edmund Campbell, senior parliamentary reporter at the Jamaica Gleaner. And it says Prime Minister Andrew Holness is expected to declare in short order his administration's position on whether Jamaica should accede to the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ. Goes on to say, Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs Marley Malahoo Fort told members of the lower house on Tuesday that the Holness administration is paying close attention to the poll results on Jamaica's preference for the CCJ over the United Kingdom-based Privy Council. An RGR Gleaner Communications Group Commission Don Anderson poll revealed last Friday that 58.9% of Jamaicans are of the view that Jamaica should do away with the United Kingdom Privy Council in favor of the CCJ. Only 23% of those surveyed believe that the country should stay with the Privy Council. There have been sustained calls by the parliamentary opposition for the government to tell the country where it stands in relation to the CCJ becoming Jamaica's final appellate court. last month, opposition leader and People's National Party president Mark Golding said the PNP would not support the removal of the British monarch as head of state without the simultaneous removal of the UK Privy Council as Jamaica's final court of appeal. On Tuesday, Malahoo Fort, who is also co-chair of the Constitutional Reform Committee, told the House that the Prime Minister will respond to calls for him to address the issue in short order. According to Malahoo Fort, there is and should be no disagreement that it is unacceptable and untenable to continue with an arrangement where Jamaicans need a visa to access their final court. She also updated the House on the CRC on CRC deliberations to reform Jamaica's constitution. So she promised that there would have been a comment soon. This report was from October when she addressed the House. November, December, January, February, March, April, May. 7 months later. And she was asked point blank, you said soon, what is the government's position on the CCJ? And the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Minister failed to respond to the question, in my humble opinion. I did not hear an answer from the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. While the government is obfuscating, so the PNP is being obstructionist, and the government is basically obfuscating on this matter of the CCJ. The JLP is no spring chicken. The CCJ has been around for a little while. How is it possible that the government does not have a settled position on the CCJ at this point? That, I believe, is unacceptable. The idea that you're going around canvassing views now it can't be acceptable at all. Yeah, it cannot be acceptable. Are there multiple avenues to resolve this? Absolutely. The CCJ is one. Yeah, a locally based final appellate court is another. Yes. And the Privy Council, remaining with the Privy Council, is also another option on the table. The government needs to be clear on whether or not it supports going to the CCJ. That is what the government needs to be clear on. And the JLP are failing to do that. And it has therefore given the opposition an opportunity to be obstructionist. Be clear about where you stand on the CCJ. And it does not therefore then mean that you are going to choose to remain with the Privy Council. Yeah, it does not mean that. You can make your point to be very nuanced. And I believe the JLP is failing the country in that regard. It's given the PNP an out regarding the CCJ. Be clear on the matter. Say this is where we stand on the issue. Stop obfuscating and dodging and dancing and evading the issue. Governments are elected to lead. I will say that again. But this takes us back to the unreasonable posture taken by the opposition leader, Mark Golding, of not being prepared to undertake the constitutional reform process on a phased basis. That is not acceptable. The opposition could have insisted on going forward with phase one. Only if phase two is carried out within a specified period. But no, under the leadership of Mark Jefferson Golding, it has chosen to be obstructionist. And yes, the PNP is being obstructionist. And the JLP is obfuscating, dithering, dodging, dancing on the CCJ matter. I have some unsolicited advice for the opposition PNP. You are not the government. Not now anyway. And until the Jamaican people decide otherwise, it should refrain from being obstructionist. The job of the opposition is to help to hold the government accountable, not to prevent the government from being able to govern and move forward on important matters that require consensus. That is not the job of the opposition. It has been suggested by one member of the Constitutional Reform Committee that this process be abandoned and reassumed after the next general elections. Some have suggested that the proximity or the constitutional proximity, that is, of the next general elections is perhaps the reason why the politics seems to be so pronounced. But let me tell you something, Jamaicans. We've seen this script before. Different actors, but the same script. We've seen it before. I'm uncertain that they're going to change their posture even after the next general elections. because it does appear that while the PNP supports the CCJ, the Jamaica Labour Party does not support acceding to the CCJ as the country's final appellate court. And it needs to come clear and tell the country what their position on the matter is. I don't see how a general election is going to change their position on the matter. So the political parties and their politicians can't arrive at consensus. This is a recording, Nothing new there. Yet another example of our politicians failing the Jamaican people. So here is my suggestion, unsolicited advice for the present conflict. Mark Goling says a 2/3 majority is what the Constitution requires, and we can't go around that. I don't agree with Mark Goling. We can honor the 2/3 majority after we go to a referendum. That is the solution on this matter. Put the matter to the Jamaican people. The CCJ is not the only option, which is why the opposition cannot come to the table with that loaded gun drawn. The CCJ is not the only option. There's also the option of establishing our own final court right here in Jamaica. There's also that option. So I'm saying to the Jamaican people, let your voices be heard. This matter on what should be the final appellate court in the country should be the subject of a referendum. And it can be the subject of a referendum if they can't put down their weapons and come together and meet like Mrs. Portia Simpson-Miller and Mr. Bruce Golding did and agreed on. That is what leadership looks like, Mark Golding and Prime Minister Andrew Holness, Opposition Leader Mark Golding and Prime Minister Andrew Holness need to take a page out of the book of Prime Minister Portia Simpson-Miller and former Prime Minister Portia Simpson-Miller and former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. Take a page out of their book. They met behind the Speaker's chair and hammered out consensus. Why can't these two grown men do that? So since the politicians can't decide, the bosses of the politicians, you the people, must ultimately decide and settle this impasse and political deadlock. What do I mean by that? How do we put it to a referendum yet honor the Constitution? After you put this thing to a referendum, wherever the majority goes, that is where the people in Parliament should vote. If the majority say we want to remain with the Privy Council, even though I don't think that should happen, I'm weighing and measuring it, if the majority says the CCJ, if the majority says a final appellate court, that is how the people in Parliament should vote. Take your cue from the referendum. It can be done. The matter must rightly be put to a referendum because I don't believe the PNP and the JLP are going to be at one on this matter concerning the CCJ. Well, anyway, we can't be sure because the JLP still doesn't want to say where it stands on the CCJ. Absolute madness. And we must bring this matter to an end. The politicians are not our bosses. The bosses of the politicians, the people of Jamaica. Put the matter to the people of Jamaica. And after they've decided, you go into Gordon House and you vote according to what the referendum says. That is the simple solution for this matter. We need to remove the king as head of state. King Charles does not need to be the head of this country any longer. We need to fix this issue. And since Mark Golding and Andrew Holness can't decide, since Prime Minister Andrew Michael Holness and Opposition Leader Mark Jefferson Golding cannot come to a consensus on this matter, let the bosses of the politicians decide. Put the matter to a referendum, and then the politicians take their cue from the referendum and vote in that regard.